and steady wins the race. Aesop. The many indigenous peoples of the northeastern North American continent called their land, and possibly the planet itself, Turtle Island. The Iroquois, who once ruled over much of upstate New York and southeastern Ontario, told the tale of an island floating in tranquil space. The sky goddess fell down from a hole left by a fallen tree. Yes, I know this sounds like a trippy acid trip, and was rescued by birds, who took her safely down to the waters that covered the earth below, from the heavens that she fell from. A turtle came up to rescue her, and many of the sea creatures piled dirt on top of the turtle's back, which made the turtle grow bigger and bigger until it became an island, and then a continent, the continent that we now know of as North America, or as they saw it, the world. After all, the Native Americans and the First Nations people were unaware of the rest of the world before the arrival of Europeans, so Turtle Island was, in fact, the world. Eventually, this patch of dirt atop a turtle's shell became lush with vegetation, fauna, and eventually humans. Turtle Island has been in more recent years used as a symbol of indigenous activism, signifying the original inhabitants of North America and their union with nature. Turtles, being the bedrock of the world, is not just relegated to First Nations people. Various other cultures include the world turtle as a motif, from India to China and elsewhere. The world on the back of a turtle is oftentimes used as an example of infinite regress in philosophy and first or non-first causation. Take the idea of the world turtle. If the world is atop of a turtle, then what is that turtle sitting on? Well, maybe another turtle, and then another, and then it's turtles all the way down. The phrase turtles all the way down is used to illustrate the problems with causation and infinite regress. It oftentimes is used in arguments regarding the existence of God, who or what created the universe, how can something come from nothing, or how something couldn't come from nothing for that matter. However, I would argue that such a problem is not really one of infinite regress, but rather the human mind's inability to understand such matters. You know who also can't comprehend first causation? Turtles. The first pets I ever had were actually 2 red-eared sliders and 2 Russian tortoises. And in homage to them, I want to make a video, not covering the biology or ecology of the turtle in depth, but rather the way turtles, tortoises, and terrapins have impacted human culture throughout history, and my ongoing series on human-animal relationships. While not our best friends the dogs, or transportation like the horses, or our food like the chicken, or our executioners the mosquitoes, or even that cute animal we love a lot but doesn't really care about us, the cat. Turtles, nonetheless, have played a significant role in human cultures throughout the world. An animal famous for its shell that provides them with not only a rib cage, but also protects them from some of the harshest elements nature has to offer. At this point in Earth's biological history, there are over 350 species of turtles, some of which inhabit the most arid deserts, others live along lush freshwater rivers, and some that swim across the vastest of salty oceans. Some are found in forests, others in grasslands, others in canyons, others in reefs. Any ecosystem on the planet, with the exception of the most frigid tundra and the darkest ocean depths, will call turtles their home. Of course, the most noticeable example of the turtle is its shell, which is attached to the ribs. Contrary to what cartoons may tell you, turtles cannot leave their shell, unless you want to rip their flesh out of their skeleton, and dying for no reason is not a good evolutionary strategy. The shells are, for the most part, made up of bones, which are made up of calcium. Calcium is to biology what steel is for civil engineering, providing a rigid and strong structure for organisms. The shell, for the most part, are usually plated, with additional armor made up of keratin shells, or keratin. Keratin is a group of fibrous proteins. Keratin is what makes up your fingernails, along with the claws of your cat, the hooves of a horse, and the horn of a rhino. Keratin is one of the best forms of weaponry and armor biology has produced, namely in animals with a backbone. From horns to nails to scales to your tortoise shells, the hardness of keratin is both the sword and shield of nature. Turtles, for the most part, have calcium-based bones and shells made up of both calcium and keratin, and scales made out of keratin. I keep fluctuating between calling it keratin and keratin because I've heard both, but bear with me. Anyway, this makes them a biological fortress, protecting from the harshest elements of nature. The combination of the carapace dome at the top with the flatter plate at the bottom creates a biological bunker, shielding the turtle from the elements and predators. Even their limbs and head, which can usually retract into their body, are covered in hard scales, yet despite not being soft and fluffy, many still manage to be cute. Turtles have placed more points in defense than virtually any other animal. With the exception of snapping turtles, most of them haven't really placed that much emphasis on hunting or anything based off of aggression. Most tortoises on land will eat a diet almost exclusively on plants. Sea turtles mostly eat algae, seagrass, and seaweed, and a few invertebrates here and there. Terrapins, or freshwater turtles, are the most prone to eating flesh, but at the end of the day, most of them are fine with eating plant matter too. Sure, there are some outliers like the snapping turtle, a creature that can pretty much break every stereotype about turtles, but by and large, terrapins are peaceful, plant-eating creatures, and when they do eat meat, it's usually composed of small invertebrates like snails that lack the cuteness for humans to really care about. On top of that, turtles by and large live for a long period of time. Tortoises in particular live the longest of lives, one of the few types of animals which live longer than the average human. The Galapagos tortoise, Harriet, lived till the age of 175 years, taken by Charles Darwin from Ecuador in 1835 to Australia, dying at the Australia Zoo in 2006. By the way, the Australia Zoo is owned by the family of Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. The Galapagos tortoises, which I had the pleasure of seeing during my trip to Ecuador a few years ago, are the largest land-dwelling, cold-blooded creatures on the planet, living in the Galapagos Islands, which translate into the Tortoise Islands, where Darwin discovered evolution and natural selection. The Galapagos are kind of like the scientific Garden of Eden, as the animals have been in isolation from humans for so long, on a series of islands distant from major terrestrial predators to the point where the animals don't act out in fear. These tortoises and their shells played a substantial role in Darwin's studies on natural selection. He noticed, for example, how the fruit on top of a tall cacti resulted in the tortoises on that island having longer necks. However, the islands with roughly lower-lying foliage resulted in more compact tortoises. There are numerous subspecies of the Galapagos tortoise. One on the island of Pinta went extinct. The last remaining one was Lonesome George, who died in 2012, bringing an end of the Pinta Galapagos tortoises. Lonesome George, unfortunately, was not a Chad and did not produce a lot of offspring. However, another Galapagos tortoise from another species, by the name of Diego, was so horny he saved this subspecies from extinction. He pounded those Stacies like a true Giga Chad turtle. The Galapagos tortoise is also illustrative of another feature of turtles, their longevity. Tortoises are one of the very few animals which live longer than your typical human, as stated before. There are various hypotheses behind this form of slow growth rate, from its slow metabolic rate to them investing in longevity since they're not common prey items from various animals and then can set aside certain traits to live longer. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, they have become symbols of living a long, peaceful, and tranquil life in the eyes of so many human cultures. Such a long, peaceful life is rather atypical for nature, which is red in tooth and claw. In many ways, turtles, more than any other animal, aside from the modern human, have been sheltered, literally, from the harshest realities of nature. And sure, that has come at the cost of speed, being one of the slowest animals on the planet. But I'd rather be slow and safe than die at 150 kilometers per hour in rush hour. This sort of similarity to the human experience, the ability to shelter oneself from the elements of nature and live a long life, is what makes turtles a source of much fascination for cultures all around the world. Across cultures, turtles have been symbols of wisdom, longevity, patience, and tranquility. In West Africa, turtles were seen by the Yoruba people, one of the major ethnic groups in Nigeria, as smart creatures, which seem slow and unthreatening on first glance, but would oftentimes be clever enough to outplay other characters. This trope has been seen in Greece with Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare, a story that you are all probably familiar with, but perhaps didn't know it comes from an ancient Greek slave. The story involves a hare or rabbit that mocks the slow tortoise, and then the two end up deciding on racing each other. The hare starts off moving far faster than the tortoise for obvious reasons, but in its arrogance takes a nap, only to wake up to find out that the tortoise won the race. The story has oftentimes been used to illustrate the power of grit over innate qualities, persistence over giving up, humility over arrogance, and delayed gratification over instant gratification. There are multiple variations of the story and countless adaptations from cartoons to live-action plays. In Chinese civilization, turtles are oftentimes a symbol of longevity, fitting for a culture that itself has had better longevity than nearly any other throughout history. While modern Egypt is vastly different culturally from that of ancient Egypt, and Mexico is vastly different than that of the Olmecs, or India today is very different than that of pre-Indo-European Indus River Valley civilizations, China in many ways has its roots in the first complex farming settlements on the Yellow River. For this reason, turtles play a role as one of the most revered animals, only beat by the dragon, tiger, and a few others. And if I were to bring this back to pop culture, in the video game World of Warcraft, the Pandarian starting point, a culture based off of Chinese civilization, is on the back of a giant turtle. Sound familiar? On the Indian subcontinent, Hinduism has its own world turtle story, of a world sitting on the back of an elephant on top of a turtle. The Abrahamic views of turtles are all over the place. Turtles were prohibited from being eaten under Jewish law alongside pigs and shrimp, which I guess was good for the turtles. Turtles don't play as prominent of a role in Christianity as, say, do sheep, goats, or fish, but they do get sometimes viewed as symbols of Christian virtues of patience and peace, but also as creatures who are slow carrying, as they have to carry the burden of their sins on top of their shells. Sea turtles have been depicted as symbols of good luck and guidance by Allah in Islamic culture, which is not surprising as the religion which began near the coral-rich Red Sea would probably have adherence to the notion of some rudimentary level of an animal like the sea turtle, which would go on long voyages and then return to the place of their birth. While it is true that adult turtles are oftentimes shielded from the harshest realities of nature, the same is not true for the baby sea turtles. Sea turtles will lay over 100 eggs and have 1 or 2 survive into adulthood. This results in an epic race of survival. In the first few hours of their lives, the few that do grow up will one day return to that beach to lay eggs again, thus continuing the circle. The sea turtle life cycle is one of the most captivating, covering themes of brutality, resilience, determination, and nostalgia all in one. A beautiful natural narrative. There are countless other stories from ancient tales, religious scripture, and oral traditions, all about turtles, but I'll skip over them to focus on modern-day pop culture. One of the least featured yet most memorable characters in Looney Tunes was Cecil Turtle, who races Bugs Bunny and beats him, in a modern rendition of Aesop's tale of the tortoise and the hare. Cecil Turtle is one of the very few characters in the cartoon series which outwits Bugs Bunny. During the Super Mario Bros. Movie, Mario explains to Peach that he's perplexed at how turtles are depicted as the bad guys in the Mushroom Kingdom. A bit unusual given that turtles tend to have a positive image in Japanese culture as well. But I'm really not going to bother finding a rational explanation for a fictional universe filled with talking mushroom people and hills that have eyes. Pokemon, which also comes from Japan and is one of the most prominent pieces of Japanese pop culture, has the original 150 Pokemon, which includes Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise. Squirtle is one of the most iconic Pokemon, probably only after Pikachu, Charizard, and Mewtwo. And I guess this racist looking thing. Squirtle is shilled and shilled and shilled for countless pieces of merchandise. During the late 80s, if we were going to take a step backward by decade, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started off as a comic parody of Batman and Daredevil before becoming a children's show, as well as a handful of crappy movies produced by Michael Bay. However, turtles in the real world aren't doing as cool. Over half of them are currently threatened significantly due to human activity. The hardest hit are the sea turtles, affected by water pollution, climate change, and, as much as I'd like to deny it, many terrestrial turtles, both tortoises and terrapins, have been threatened by the pet industry, which breaks my heart as someone who kept turtles as a pet. Some species, on the other hand, have been too successful, in part due to the pet industry, such as the red-eared slider, the first pet I ever had. Common in the pet trade, and due to their long lifespan, they are oftentimes released into the wild, outcompeting native species outside of the eastern United States and Canada. But by and large, they're the outlier. Sea turtles, struggling the most, have become an icon of conservation due to them being prettier than tortoises, which look like Mitch McConnell. Given that they are threatened by fishing bycatch and choking off with plastic bags that they oftentimes confuse as being jellyfish, they have oftentimes become big megafauna used by non-governmental organizations in conservation marketing campaigns. While turtles have been shielded from some of the worst elements of nature, their hard shells have proven to be less suited to protecting them from the harshest realities of humans. If we value longevity, then perhaps we should make the world a place where turtles, humans, and other creatures can live out long, healthy, happy lives. Except for mosquitoes, which I'm going to talk about next. Fuck mosquitoes.